All of our videos here are brought to you by the Landscape Certified Contractors Association. Due to the membership support, we're able to bring these videos to you each and every week. If you'd like to be part of our organization and help us bring these videos to you, make sure you visit www.irrigatortech.com and have a great day.
Most owner's manuals will have a section with a maintenance chart detailing the types of maintenance you should perform and at what intervals. In your steel manual, this section will cover the basic inspection and maintenance that you must perform to keep your steel chainsaw in top shape. If you are unable to perform any of these functions for any reason, return your chainsaw to an authorized dealer to have the inspection and maintenance performed before you use your chainsaw. Performing an inspection and performing proper maintenance of your chainsaw and its components prior to using your saw will result in a more productive and safer cutting experience. Always make sure that you have turned off the engine, the chain is stopped, and the muffler is cool before refueling, making adjustments, performing maintenance or repairs, changing the saw chain, or cleaning the saw. And never attempt any maintenance or repair work not described in your owner's manual. Have those items taken care of by your authorized dealer. First, check the fasteners on your chainsaw, making sure they are snug. Retighten any loose fasteners and replace any that may be missing or damaged. Check the AV system and that all of the buffers are in place and functioning properly. Replace damaged, broken, or excessively worn buffers immediately. They may result in loss of control of your chainsaw. A sponginess in the feel of the saw, increased vibration, or noticeable bottoming during normal operation may indicate damage, breakage, or excessive wear. And if replacement is necessary, always replace the buffers in sets. Check your air filter often. There are several different types and designs of air filters, and if yours is dirty, clean the filter according to the manufacturer's directions in the owner's manual, or replace the filter if necessary. Most filters can be cleaned temporarily by simply tapping them on a log, for instance, releasing the heavier particles that have built up on the filter. A tip when accessing your air filter: always close the choke on your carburetor before removing the air filter. This will block sawdust or dirt from accidentally falling into the throat of the carburetor. Occasionally, you will need to inspect your fuel filter. Be cautious not to do this around any open flames or other sources of ignition, as fumes from the tank are very flammable. Clean or replace the fuel filter as necessary, according to your owner's manual. Make sure that the chain on your saw does not rotate on the bar when the saw is at idle. If the chain moves when the saw is idling, you must adjust the saw's idle using the proper adjustment screw on the carburetor. Check your owner's manual for more detailed information on your saw's idle screw placement and adjustment procedure. If you cannot get the chain to stop rotating at idle, take the saw to your authorized dealer for the necessary adjustments or repairs before using your saw. Check your muffler and spark arrestor according to your manual's maintenance schedule. If you find that the spark arrestor is clogged or dirty, clean the part or replace it. Operating your saw with a clogged spark arrestor can cause serious damage to your saw's engine. And never operate your chainsaw without the spark arrestor, as the sparks from the muffler can easily start a fire. The bar, chain, and sprocket will require frequent inspection and upkeep, and are some of the highest maintenance components of your chainsaw. There are two types of sprockets commonly used on chainsaws today: rim-type sprockets and spur sprockets. Sprockets will wear as the saw is used and will require replacement. A good rule of thumb for replacement is to install a new sprocket after every 2 chains that you wear out. Here is a new unworn rim sprocket, and this is a rim sprocket with considerable wear that should be replaced. This is a spur-type sprocket with no wear, and one that is worn and should be replaced as well. The method for replacing your sprocket will depend on the mounting design used on your chainsaw. On most steel models, steel uses an outboard mount design that is very easy to service, even in the field. Simply remove the E-clip and the washer, and the rim slips off the clutch drum, and the drum and bearing will now slide off the crankshaft. Now you can easily clean your parts and reinstall them, making sure to add a slight amount of high-temperature grease to the needle bearing and crankshaft. When reinstalling the drum on your steel saw, rotate it about 1 turn to make sure that you've engaged the oil pump drive. slip on the rim, and reinstall the washer and E-clip. Other styles may require the removal of the clutch first with special tools to access the sprocket for maintenance. Check your owner's manual for the procedure to properly replace your sprocket. Your saw chain will require sharpening. The frequency for sharpening your chain will depend on several factors, such as whether or not you have let the chain come into contact with the ground or any other foreign object, the type of wood you are cutting, the amount of dirt or foreign objects that can be embedded in the wood. Here, for example, is where a barbed wire fence has been absorbed by a tree through years of growth. And your chain can reach speeds up to 45 miles per hour. And if it comes into contact with the ground for just a split second, that can be more than enough to dull the chain to the point that it will require immediate sharpening. Even a standing tree will have a certain amount of dirt embedded into its bark from wind-blown debris that will dull your chain over time. One good rule of thumb to make sure your chain remains sharp and in good condition is to file the chain with a few light strokes on each tooth using a file and guide each time you refuel, even if you think it's still sharp. You can determine the chain's condition by physically inspecting the cutter edges for rough or worn spots. Also, be sure to inspect the chain links and rivets for wear, cracks, or damage. If any part of your chain is cracked, worn, or damaged, you should replace it immediately and have the damaged chain inspected and repaired if possible by your authorized dealer. When operating your chainsaw, there are certain things you can look for that will indicate the condition of your chain. When the chain is sharpened properly, it will produce large, well-defined chips from the cut, as seen here. When a chain isn't sharpened properly or is dull, it will produce a finely granulated form of powdery sawdust like this. Looking at the sawdust is a good first indication of the condition of your chain. In operation, your chainsaw is designed to cut effortlessly and with very little pressure applied by the operator. If you find that you have to apply excess pressure to the saw in order for it to cut, the chain is most likely dull. Or you may have a problem with your bar and chain lubrication system. Often when you find that you have to apply a lot of pressure to make the chainsaw cut, you will also see smoke coming off the tip of the bar, another good indication of the chain's condition or a lubrication problem. If these conditions occur, you may need to sharpen the chain immediately or replace it, and check the bar and chain lubrication system. To continue cutting with a dull chain or a lack of bar and chain lubricant will cause operator fatigue and a high rate of wear on critical parts of your chainsaw. Another indicator to look for is if your chainsaw tends to drift right or left in the cut. This would indicate that the angles on your chain have been sharpened incorrectly and will need to be resharpened. Or it could mean that your bar rails have worn unevenly. This can also cause operator fatigue, unsafe operating conditions, or damage to your chainsaw. With the right tools and instruction, you can maintain your steel bar, chain, and sprocket with confidence. Let's look at how you would perform this service in the field. When you're ready to service the bar and chain, pick a large flat area to perform the work, such as the tailgate of a pickup truck. Remember, the chain has sharp edges, so always be sure to wear sturdy work gloves when handling the bar and chain. With the chainsaw engine turned off and the muffler cooled down and the chain brake released, use your bar wrench to loosen and remove the nuts on the chain sprocket cover. Remove the cover, release the bar from the chain tensioner's adjustment pin, slide the bar back, and remove the chain and the bar. Check your sprocket and drum for wear and make sure they rotate freely. If the sprocket is significantly worn, you should replace it. At this point, it's a good idea to clean away the sawdust and debris that is built up on the saw with a rag. Even an old toothbrush can come in handy for this task. Clean the inside portion of the cover around the clutch drum area, taking special care to clean thoroughly around the automatic chain oiler's discharge area, not allowing anything to become lodged in the portal. Your bar will also need to be checked and maintained. If your bar has a roller or sprocket nose, make sure that the roller or sprocket nose rotates freely. Some bars may have a grease hole at the tip that will require greasing periodically. Check your owner's manual for the maintenance procedure for your chainsaw's guide bar. With a rag, wipe the bar down, removing any debris. With a bar groove cleaning tool, like the one shown here, starting from the tip of the bar, remove the debris that's become impacted in the bar rails. And remember to always wear gloves when handling your bar, as the bar rails can become very sharp as they become worn. The rearward end of the bar will have a series of holes and slots. These are the oil inlet hole, the chain tensioner's adjustment pin hole, and the bar stud slot. It is extremely important that these areas are completely free from dirt and impacted debris. Through wear, you may find that your bar rails will form a rolled over edge. If this occurs, with a flat file, smooth the edges down, again making sure to wear gloves during the process. If the bar is severely worn, you will need to replace it. Now that your components are cleaned, reinstall the guide bar on the saw. First, turn the chain tensioner's adjustment screw counterclockwise, allowing the pin to move back towards the sprocket. This will allow slack in the chain, making it easier to install. When installing your guide bar, always place the bar with the opposite side up from when you last took it off. Doing so, you will displace the wear more evenly on both sides of the bar, resulting in a longer service life. Place your bar over the bar studs, sliding it as far back as you can. Install the chain on the bar, making certain the cutting edge of the chain will rotate in a clockwise direction around the bar when looking at it from the sprocket side. Once the chain is placed on the bar, and the drivers are properly engaged with the sprocket, position the bar where the chain tensioner adjustment pin lines up with the proper hole in the guide bar. Reinstall the chain sprocket cover and the nuts, but only finger tight, as you will need movement in the guide bar to adjust the chain. The bar will have slight up and down play. To adjust your chain properly, turn the adjusting screw tensioning the chain to the point where it sits firmly against the bottom rail of the bar, but not so tight that the chain won't rotate freely around the bar. Continue to hold the tip of the bar up and tighten the nuts on the cover. Double check your work by pulling down on the chain and letting it snap back, and by rotating the chain around the bar. If the chain doesn't snap back snugly against the bottom rail, you will need to tighten it some more. And if it won't rotate freely around the guide bar by hand, you have over-tightened the chain and will need to loosen it slightly. Repeat the adjustment process until the proper chain tension has been achieved. As the chain gets hot, it will stretch, as well as by wear through use. Constantly keep an eye on your chain's adjustment when working with the saw. If you see that it's loose, turn the saw off, let the muffler cool down, disengage the chain brake, and make the necessary adjustments. And remember, even a dull chain can be sharp enough to cut you, so always wear gloves when handling the chain or making adjustments. A loose chain can cause serious damage to your saw, and if loose enough, it can even come off the bar, possibly causing serious injury to the operator. If your chain appears to be sticking to the bar or will not rotate smoothly when you accelerate the saw, turn off the saw and check to see if you have bar and chain oil in the bar and chain oil reservoir. You can check to see if your oiler is working by holding the tip of the guide bar near a fresh cut piece of wood, taking extreme precaution not to let the tip of the bar touch the wood, and accelerating the saw with the chain brake disengaged. If the oiler is working, you will see a fine film of oil that will appear on the wood. If you have sufficient bar and chain oil, and your oiler is working properly, but the chain still will not rotate, you should take the saw to your nearest authorized dealer for the necessary repairs. Now that you have cleaned your saw, reinstalled the bar and chain, and made the proper adjustments, it's time to sharpen your chain. A handy tool for sharpening the chain in the field is this stump vise that will hold the saw firmly while sharpening. If you are sharpening your chain in a workshop or garage, a bench vise will work just as handily. Other items you will need to properly sharpen your chain are a file and guide with the proper size round file, a flat file, and a depth gauge tool. Check your owner's manual or ask your authorized dealer for the proper file size and depth gauge tool required for your saw's chain. This information can also be found in the chain leaflet packed with new loops of steel chain. Before we sharpen the chain, it will help you understand the process better if you know the different components that make up your chain. These are the cutters. Your chain has separate left and right-hand cutters. They are the parts you will be sharpening. Located on the front of each of the cutters is a protrusion called the depth gauge, or as some people like to refer to as the raker or drag. The depth gauge acts much like the adjustment on a hand-plane chisel and determines the depth of the cut or chip that the tooth will take. The wider the gap between the tooth's cutting edge and the top of the depth gauge, the larger the chip the chain will take. If there were no gap between the cutting edge and the depth gauge, the chain virtually wouldn't cut at all. Your chain has been designed to cut optimally with a specific depth gauge clearance. Check your owner's manual or with your authorized dealer to see what gap is specified for your chain. You can see that the cutter's top plate has a declining slope. As the tooth's cutting edges sharpen back, the depth gauge will also need to be filed to maintain the recommended chip clearance between the tops of the depth gauge and the tooth's cutting edge. The chain consists of a series of tie straps and rivets which hold the components together, separating the left and right-hand cutters alternately. This is the drive link. It has several functions. It's the portion of the chain that engages the sprocket, propelling the chain around the guide bar. It acts as a scooping device, dispersing the lubricant that comes from the oiler to components of the bar and chain, and it guides the chain in the bar groove. For your chain to be sharpened properly, you must make sure that each tooth has been filed at the same specific angles with the proper file, that the top plate of each cutter tooth is the same length, and that the depth gauges are set at the proper height. Begin the process by looking for the cutter with the most damage or wear. This will become your master cutter. Once sharpened properly, this cutter's shape and length will be what all the other cutters should look like. Not doing so will result in poor cutting performance. Your chain will run roughly and could even break. As you file the first cutter, count the number of filing strokes that you take, and be conscious of the amount of pressure you're applying to the file. Using the same number of strokes with the same amount of pressure on the rest of your cutters should result in a consistent length on each. If you're uncertain, check the individual cutter's lengths with a measuring device. If you find that some teeth are longer than others, make the necessary sharpening adjustments. Always file the cutter from the inner portion of the cutter outward. Never file from the outside in. This will dull the chain and damage the file. And when you're filing, never allow the file to drag back across the cutting edge when pulling the file back. Doing so will quickly dull your cutter and damage your file as well. Your file and guide has a plate positioned on both sides of the file. Placing the file and guide on the chain, the plate on one side of the file will rest on the leading edge of the cutter, while the other plate will rest on the top portion of the depth gauge. Equipped with the proper size round file, and assuming that your depth gauges have been maintained in the past, this will give your round file the proper filing depth when sharpening, resulting in the proper edge on the cutter. Also, when filing, the file and guide should be held at a 90-degree angle to the bar, or level. Tilting the file and guide even slightly can result in a misfiled chain that won't function properly. On the top of your file and guide, you will see lines scribed into the metal. These lines, kept parallel to the guide bar when sharpening each tooth, will result in the proper angle required for the tooth's cutting edge. When used properly, your file and guide will help assure a proper and consistent cutting angle and filing depth on each tooth. This is how a properly sharpened cutter should look. Here is a cutter that has been improperly filed and has a severe back slope, a sign possibly indicating that too large a file was used. This chain has a severe hook indicating that too small a round file was used, or that the file was pushed down too hard and allowed to drop too far down into the tooth during the filing process. Here you see a top plate with too shallow of an angle, and this is a top plate with too severe an angle. Now that you have the proper file and guide, and you have determined your starting point, begin your filing. Remember to count your strokes, the amount of pressure you're applying to the file, and do not drag your file back across the cutter. The right and left-hand cutters alternate, so you will need to file every other tooth from one side of the bar, or all of the right-hand cutters first, for instance. Then change to the other side to sharpen all of the left-hand cutters, again remembering to keep the angles and depth the same on all teeth. Once all of your cutters have been sharpened, on both sides, you'll need to check the depth gauge height and file down the tang if needed. Place the depth gauge tool on the chain as shown here, allowing the tooth's depth gauge to protrude in the slot of the tool. If any portion of the depth gauge protrudes above the slot in the tool, that portion will need to be filed down level with the depth gauge tool using your flat file. Perform this same procedure for every tooth. If the depth gauges are not maintained and are too high, not allowing enough clearance, this will result in poor performance and reduce the chain's ability to cut. If you don't use the proper depth gauge tool and file the depth gauges too low, below the manufacturer's specifications, This will result in a chain that cuts too aggressively, possibly causing harm to your saw and increasing the risk of kickback, making the chainsaw very unsafe, which can result in serious or even fatal injury to the operator. If you have filed your chain's depth gauges several times, you may find the leading edge of the depth gauge will need to be dressed to conform to an angle similar to how it looked when it was new. Steel depth gauges have a line scribed into the metal showing the proper angle for the leading edge for you to follow. If you don't maintain this angle, it can result in excessive vibration when cutting, as well as diluting the low kickback properties on some chains. For some people, sharpening a chain is very uncomfortable or even intimidating. If this is the case with you, you may want to keep one or more spare chains that are sharpened properly with you while you are working with your chainsaw. As your chain becomes dull, you can easily replace the dull chain with one of the sharpened spares. When you're done with your work, return your dull chains to your authorized dealer where they can be properly sharpened on a specially designed electric chain grinder, and you will be ready to cut again with a set of freshly sharpened chains. Next, check your chain brake to make sure it is functioning properly and that it engages and disengages. Like an automobile brake, your chainsaw's chain brake will incur wear each time it is engaged. The amount of wear will vary depending on things such as usage or even the conditions in which the saw is used. Excessive wear will reduce the effectiveness of the chain brake and can ultimately render it inoperable. Beyond your own inspection, you should always return your steel chainsaw to your authorized dealer to have the chain brake inspected according to the schedule found in your steel owner's manual. With the engine running at idle, engage the chain brake by moving your left wrist forward while gripping the handle. Then accelerate the engine to full throttle for no more than about 3 seconds to avoid premature wear to the braking system or harm to the engine. The chain must not rotate. If the chain brake fails to function properly, it is imperative that you take your chainsaw to an authorized dealer for the proper repairs prior to using the chainsaw again. We've performed all of the basic inspection and maintenance on your chainsaw. It's almost time to cut wood, but before we do, let's take a look at protective apparel that is available today, critical to reducing the risk of serious or fatal injury while operating a chainsaw. Remember, a chainsaw is a very powerful tool, and if not handled properly, it can be a dangerous or even deadly tool. Protective apparel has been designed to help reduce injuries when using your chainsaw. Just like helmets and pads can help reduce injuries to your children when playing today's sports. You invest in their protection. It's just as important, and you owe it to yourself, your family, and your friends to take the necessary precautions to reduce your risks. Invest in the proper protective apparel and reduce the chances of exposing yourself to serious injury or even death when working with your chainsaw. Some of the major components of protective apparel today are heavy work boots, preferably with steel toes and cut-retardant material, specially designed Angtex chaps or leggings designed to quickly stop a chain should the chain have accidental contact with you, the most common cause for injuries when using a chainsaw. Protective shirts are also available with this same Angtex material, as well as gloves, a helmet system with ANSI-rated hearing protection and face shield, and ANSI-rated protective eyewear. Our operator shown here has on his proper protective apparel, and like our operator, Steele strongly advises that you always wear heavy denim work trousers that fit snugly and do not drag on the ground. His shirt is tucked in and not hanging loosely. All precautions that you should take when dressing for work when using your chainsaw. Plus, if you have long or braided hair, it's recommended that you either pin your hair up or securely tuck it into your shirt or helmet system. Okay, it's time to get to work. Your cutting experience should consist of...
All right. Okay, so saw chain. I'm going to pass this around so you guys can see this, but this is basically a cutter on a saw chain. This is a drive link. The drive link actually goes in the guide bar in between the rails there. If this is too small, it'll go out. If it's too big, it won't sit in there. It's important that you have the right, the thickness there, okay? The other thing, as they were talking about here, is the very first part of this is called a raker or a depth gauge. This determines how deep you're going to enter the cut. The cutter here actually does the cutting, but as you actually sharpen this chain, the angle will go down and the depth gauge will be higher. And if that's the case, you won't be sharpening. Have you guys ever had a chain sharpen and it won't cut very well? And you're like, what happened? Well, that's because the depth gauge wasn't taken down. The problem is if you take it down this too far, you're going to actually take too much out, and it'll actually have increase the chance of kickback. So it's very important that these are the right, that you have it right. They actually make a depth gauge tool you can buy for the type of chain. So there's basically several different types of chain out there, but you want to make sure you have the right tool. What this does is it actually sits on top of the plate here, the top plate of the chainsaw cutter, and it exposes the depth gauge here. And what it does is whatever is exposed, you take a flat file, and then what you'll do is you'll actually file it down until it gets to the same level. And why that's important is it'll take the right amount. Still, and other companies, they spend a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out that right distance there. So that'll be peak performance, it won't overwork the chainsaw. Especially if you take it too down, you're going to be overworking that chainsaw, and it'll damage your machine. So that's very, very important. So let me pass this around, you guys can take a look at that. And I'll pass around the flat file and depth gauge there. Also on that depth gauge tool at the very end of it, they noticed in there when you actually take off the guide bar, there's actually a little part that you actually can scrape all the sawdust out or any gum or anything like that you have in the guide bar. So it's kind of important that you guys to clean that out. And the flat file is also for if it kind of rolls over on the guide bar, you can actually file that down too. They actually make a kit that we sell. It's called the Complete Filing Kit. It has instructions there. They actually have on YouTube. You can actually have a whole video how to actually use this. The problem is when you just take a regular file and you file it, you're supposed to file our saw chain at a 30-degree angle. Well, it's hard to get a 30-degree angle if you're just eyeing it. On our saw chain, there actually is an angle, and if you notice at the top plate when you're passing that around, there's actually a laser-etched angle in there. It's a 30-degree angle. But what's good is if you take a file guide like this, they actually have markings here that show you the angle. So when you're actually using it, you can actually use that angle. And what you want to do is make sure it's at a 90 degree that you're working on. You don't want it on a slant. You want it perfectly 90 degrees at a 30-degree angle there, and you're going to go from the inside of the tooth out. And if you look, on the tip is the out point. On the inside, the steps back a little bit more, that's the inside. So you want to go from the inside out. You push it in, lift it out. You only go one way with these. You don't want to go back and forth. It doesn't work like that. And why it's important to have a sharp chain is because if it doesn't, you're not going to cut very well. You're going to be forcing down on the cut, which is not safe. So that's important. But a file only keeps it sharp, a chain sharp. If it gets to the point where you can't sharpen it, you need to take it in and they need to put it on, I don't know how you guys do it, but you need to take it in and get it actually with a grinder. And the reason is because the hand file can only do so much. You'd be spending forever trying to get it, especially if you hit dirt. As soon as you hit dirt, it's going to dull up the chain just like that. So it's important to stay away from dirt, file foreign objects, and you want to make sure you have the right sharpening. One of my favorite ones is we do make a couple other things here. For this one, they actually make a little guide that actually sits in here, which makes it a little bit easier. So you don't have to really kind of even go off of the guides there. It just sits right on there. It's easy to do. The other thing that we have here is they make one that just sits on the bar, and then this one's my favorite one. It's called the 2-in-1 file sharpener here. Okay, they're a little bit more money than the rest of these, but this will sharpen the cutter at the same time and the depth gauge. So remember how we have to do both of them? Well, on those other ones, you have to do two separate tools. This does everything at one pass. So you see these rails here, so depending on, they make 3 different ones that we sell, depending on what type of saw chain you have, you just pick the right one, it sits on it, and all you do is you push it, and as you do that, it actually does the cutter and the depth gauge at the same time. This is the best hand filing I've ever seen, because it just does it all in one pass, which is really nice. And then as your files wear down, you can replace the files, and then the flat cutter there for the raker that does it too. And these are excellent. This is called a 2-in-1 file system. So whatever you use, you want to make sure that everybody has a file to keep the chain sharp, which is going to last. Make sure your chain lasts longer, and make sure it's safer for you. And then this too, if you can. We also make a multi-tool. We talked about a wrench. Well, sometimes you don't know where you sit these at, so they actually make these multi-tools here that has everything you need, like a T27, which will take down most of it. It has a regular Phillips and the regular screwdriver connections, and then you can take the different bar nut sizes out from there. So I'm going to pass that around for you guys too, so you guys can take a look at that. Because you want to make sure you have the proper tools for it. One thing they did talk about in there, the next thing is chaps. Chaps are very, very important because they can save your life. Well, some people they don't like to wear them because it's hot, right? But if you're using a chainsaw on the ground, it's OSHA required to have chaps. Okay? So everybody should know that. So if you're using a chainsaw, it's on the ground, and OSHA comes around, you're going to be fined. And it's happened, and it's an expensive fine.
Yeah, it's not a cheap fine, guys.
And guess what? This is California. They make money. So, and it's the right thing to do. You want to be safe. Chainsaws, they said 45 miles an hour. If you read in the safety manual, it's up to 67 miles per hour. So it's very, very important that you're using something. If you're up in a tree, it's not required for chaps, but it's still, I suggest it. Chaps come in different sizes, you know, for the lengths. They also come in, you can just clip them in the back, or they actually make wraparound chaps. They're a little bit safer. We actually have new ones now that are zip-up chaps that actually zip up on the calf area. So when you're putting them on, it's actually quite a bit faster. The problem with the buckle ones is it takes some time to put it together. So the zip-up chaps actually work a little bit nice. And then they still offer really good protection from there. I'm going to also pass this around. This is what is called Intex. There's two types of chaps out there. There's Kevlar, and then there's also, we use an Intex material. The Kevlar does a good job, but the problem with Kevlar, once it gets dirty, it cannot be cleaned. It can't be washed, okay? With our Intex material, you can wash it. So if it does become dirty, you can actually clean it. And as you can see, what happens is as they're going with it, if it actually does come in contact, all that fiber material will actually go right up into the chain brake and stop it within the fractions of a second. So it'll, you know, it still possibly could go through, cut yourself, but I've seen where actually people have used it before and it stopped. So very, very important. They actually make different layers of that. They make 6 and 9 layer, and I think a 12 layer too. So, and I think you also have some Kevlar chaps there. But whatever you do, chaps are very, very important. It's just the steel chaps, they go a little bit further on because they want to use the best material possible, and it's possible to clean it. Once you, if you actually say if it comes in contact, it nicks it, but the chaps still look good, or the chaps still fine to use, even if it gets cut with a chainsaw. Can you still use those chaps? No. Once it cuts, they're done. You throw those things away. So you buy another pair. They're $100, but what did I say? The hospital bill, that was in 1999, was $5,600. So it's probably $15,000, you know, and probably even with your copay, so it's not really worth it. So chaps are very, very important. So one thing I didn't have here today, we actually, you see how you have a safety vest with the cutter? They actually make chaps now that are in that cutter. So if you're working on a roadway, OSHA requires that you have visibility. So they actually now make chaps that actually are high visibility chaps. They come with a little whistle too, which I guess that meets the OSHA regulations. So, and they're also great for parties, especially at Halloween time. So, or other adult parties, I guess too, because they're no back. So, I got that.
Gotta come to your parties then.
Yeah, I don't know.
For
chainsaw
chap pants.
Yeah, yes, exactly, yeah. So gloves, other gloves are good. All the different kinds of gloves, we recommend just you having a good pair of gloves that are good. If any of your safety apparel is damaged, you want to replace it. The other thing that's very important is helmets. Now, if you're just using a chainsaw on the ground, eye protection, ear protection, I still recommend using a helmet system. If you're using anything, you never use a chainsaw over your head. If you need to, we recommend using a helmet system, a pole saw, and then the helmets are very important. There's no really time frame of how long they last. They have general suggestions. If you want to see how old it is, most all the helmets actually have the dates actually stamped in here so you can see. So the biggest thing with the chainsaw helmets is you want to make sure that when you actually push them in, you don't hear a crack sound, because if you hear a crack, you know, it's time to replace it. These get sun damage. They put a lot of UV inhibitors in there, but over time the sun will damage them. If it does crack, or if it looks like it's not in a good condition, you need to replace it. A lot of the our helmet systems, you can actually just replace the air muffs, the ratchet system. They have a sweat band inside. But it's important that chainsaw helmets, again, will also protect yourself. I've seen too many times where people have actually used a chainsaw kickback. I have a couple of people in my church that have used them that have actually had cuts to their head before. Luckily, the chain brake stopped it, but still, if you have a chain coming, even if it's stopped, it's going to do damage to yourself. So very, very important to have a helmet system. They do make arborist helmets if you're up in a tree, which is important too. They make shield guides for that. So, and then the right hearing protection is important too. And then always eye protection. And if it's safety glasses like Z87 or, oh, I have to grab it, but there's actually a, they have some glasses. They should be in all of them. Well, on there, they should say there's a little Z, I think 87 on all the glasses for the safety. So that's how you know that they're, well, and they're not really called safety, they're called protective glasses. Yeah, Z87 is what you're looking for. So that's how you know they're protective glasses. So if you just go to 7-Eleven and pick up a pair of glasses, it's probably not protective glasses, okay? So that's on the helmet system, how it works from there. But important, again, sharp chain, I can't tell you enough. And then the other thing is the sprockets in there. Some people never replace them, but the sprockets will wear inside. So as they get worn down, you need to replace those. And depending if you have a rim type sprocket or a spur sprocket, you just need to inspect those. If they look like they're worn down, you need to replace those. So anyway, we're going to go to the chainsaw operation, and then we'll finish it up from there.